Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. This episode is called, What is the President's Game? Poker, fighting, chess, video, hunger? Our guests for the show are Ben Davis, University of Toledo School of Law, retired, Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor, UH Manoa, Jeff Portnoy, senior partner, Cage Shetty Fleming Wright. Welcome to the show, everyone. Delusion is a disorder when the player lives and acts in an alternate world he believes he creates. A deluded leader with unlimited power considers reality as a metaphor. He treats reality as a stage, a play, a video game, entertainment, wrestling. He uses and disposes pawns, underlings, enemies, challengers to his overship. If they suffer or die, they deserve it, because the point of the game is that the president must always win. So one way to comprehend the erratic behavior of Donald Trump on the world stage is to explore game theory. If actions do not have consequences that matter, except in winning each fight, is the president's flooding of the information media, the information zone, with multiple face-offs less random and more intentional? As Trump takes on blue cities, media critics, law firms, universities, immigrants, the deep state, Greenland, NATO, cartels, Iran, Nigeria, and Venezuela, is there a method to the madness? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, Gene, let me start with you. What's his game? What's the scope of our discussion?
Well, let me start out with a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote about these people. He said, "The very rich are not like you and me." And the question we have then is, what makes them different? Of course, Hemingway had his famous reply, but it doesn't really, I think, cover the whole expansive and innovative type of behavior we see in our president. So I think if we look at this from the perspective of game theory, that for these men who have everything, to combat their distraction and their boredom and their need to always somehow intervene, you have to think about they're playing a game. And maybe they feel that they are the gamers. They are the ones who created the game. And everyone is there for their amusement and benefit. Now, that's kind of a stretch, but I'm going to take that as a working hypothesis. So then let's look at the games they could be playing, or let's look at the game that Trump might be playing. The art of the deal exposes his method, which is to make some outlandish demand. People respond negatively. He then responds to them in a way that degrades and humiliates them. They then come up with some kind of concession, and he winds up getting most of what he wants, or he just walks away. Now, how much does this paradigm explain the different interactions we've seen domestically and internationally on the part of this man? And if you take that as kind of a working paradigm in the way he works throughout the world, in any kind of situation, that it's a game and that everyone is there for his benefit, for his amusement. That's my working hypothesis.
You know, we've been talking about pathologies and psychologies for a long time about this, but, you know, you haven't really mentioned psychologies and pathologies. And I wonder, Ben, have we been wrong? Is this a pathology, a psychology phenomenon, or is it just the way he plays games, the way he played games in the schoolyard bully affair back in Queens many years ago? How much of it is pathology, and how much of it is a kind of strange game playing?
I would say that my personal impression is that it's pathological. The question maybe I'm using the word pathological not in the same way that you want, but what I mean is that whether it's a game playing or not, this kind of behavior is still pathological. Okay, now I'm not saying that he's pathological, but his behavior certainly is. He may be, completely conscious of what he's doing, but it makes no difference. One of the things that I think that is important is that you have to keep in mind that what are exactly the things that he quote unquote wins. Okay, because I mean, he says that he got a big win on this or a big win on that. That's all he wants or needs, is to be able to say he got the win. But when you go down and actually look at whatever was involved, I think the tendency is to find that, gee, there's not much there. And some of these commentaries that have been done on the various quote unquote trade agreements, the trillions of dollars coming into the United States in investment. Let's see, the winning the election in 2020. I mean, whatever, I mean, he can say all kinds of things to try to make it sound like he's a winner, right? Oh, I'm going to shut down the Kennedy Center because it needs to be renovated. I'm a winner, and what is underneath it is that they couldn't get anybody in there to actually do any shows. So we'll spin it. It's the old sales pitch spin thing, and that's great, and that's fine. But it's the illusion of being a winner that I think is as important to him, or maybe even more important than actually winning anything of any degree. That's at least the impression. And in a certain sense, the illusion is so important. That's the pathology, at least to me. But that's the way he strikes me.
Jeff, can you help us connect some of the dots here? I mean, we've called him, a lot of people have called him a fascist leader and a performer who plays to an audience whose adulation he craves as a continuous sycophantic high. He needs it. There's a pattern to his art of negotiation. It's a really special art of negotiation. And he plays it with CEOs and celebrities, non-compliant heads of state. He demands obeisance and rewards. He counters their denial with personal assaults, insults. He threatens reprisals and punishment. He offers to negotiate. He refuses counteroffers. He settles only for capitulation by backing off just a few degrees, and he obtains most of his original demands. It's a really interesting pattern. But Jeff, how do they connect up all these things? And has he been successful? Many people would argue that given the way it was in 2016, 2017, he's been quite successful in all of this. What do you think?
You've asked a bunch of questions in the middle of your speech. I'm trying to remember all of them, but I'll start with the games. Playing two games that many of us will remember: Monopoly and Risk. And he's winning in both, in his own mind at least. Monopoly is all of the money that is flowing into his personal accounts, his kids' accounts, as he buys up every property or tries to buy up every property. But he's no longer just buying streets, he's buying countries. So he's playing Monopoly on a different level. And Risk, of course, is the domination of the world, moving your battleships, moving your troops. And any of us who played Risk, that's what he's doing. Unfortunately, he doesn't have anybody playing against him. He's moving his ships, he's moving his armies in an abstract world because there's no one powerful enough to confront him except for the two countries that he's not confronting, Russia and China. So he's very smart. And he has everyone begging to conform to what he wants, both monetarily and power-wise. So those are two games. He's also playing charades, by the way, because half of what he does is a charade. It's false. It never happened. He continues to state it. You want to talk about peace in Gaza? How about the 30 people that were killed yesterday? You want to talk about peace in Ukraine? What's going on there? It's all a charade. So you wanted to talk about games. I wanted to start by talking about 3 games. He's winning 2. I think he's losing the charade game as time goes on. And I think he's realizing it because, along with all of his bluster, including as recently as yesterday to now sue Trevor Noah for his comment on the Grammys. He's going to sue him now for billions of dollars, billions. People just kowtow to him. But things are changing. You see, they're removing 700 of the troops out of Minneapolis. There's an effort, I think, that is going to be commenced to impeach our favorite ex-governor. And things are beginning to move. And he realizes, look at the deal he struck with the Democrats yesterday against several of his Republican compatriots. So I think he sees things are changing. We know what happened in Texas last week in the voting. I mean, one was expected. One is a state Senate seat that he won that district by 13 or 17%, and the Democrat won it by 13%. I think he's beginning to feel a few wounds. He's not hemorrhaging, but there are some scratches appearing on his body. So those are the games. And like every game we play, no one goes undefeated.
Manfred, let's assume he has been winning a lot of these games, and let's assume, as Jeff said, that he's been losing at least some of them lately. What does a guy like this do when he's faced with losing these games? Does he double down? We've seen that before. Does he find a new game? Does he deny losing? What do you think that Trump is going to do as a game player who may be losing the game or a combination of games? What do you think, Manfred?
Look, we are talking here, and I think you raised that issue at the beginning. We are talking about a pathological person, and this pathology started in early childhood and was supported by his father. And I think this support, beginning with his father, has continued throughout his career until today. I mean, in a way, you could say Trump is a reflection of American society as well. The support that he has received from majorities of Republicans is quite stunning. And up to today, that there is no opposition within the leadership of the Republican Party is part of this pathological phenomenon that we are watching, not only in Trump, but in large sections of American society. I mean, the world is stunned by this phenomenon, this co-production, of Trump and, well, maybe not any longer a majority of the American people. Maybe this has begun to change, that an opposition is suddenly emerging that is even appearing in the among the Republican members of Congress. I mean, look, when you're watching every night Colbert and Kimmel, it's quite stunning, the language that these two guys are using, and under applause. I mean, the people love it. Now, Kimmel was able of continuing his program, whereas Colbert, we don't know. Maybe CBS will finally realize, they made a big mistake to not extend his contract. But I mean, when I watch that every night, it is stunning. It is also, you could say, it's a powerful representation of America. That is possible. That Kimmel and Colbert and Noah and a lot of the other comedians are constantly bombarding us, with their witty critique of a president who seems to be really a caricature of what a president is supposed to be. But the world has always thought of, when talking about American presidents. So in that sense, I, I mean, I always, when I'm asked, from friends in Germany, for example, how do you explain this phenomenon, support that he still gets? Well, and I said, look, I'm always looking at the other America, at the Colbert, Kimmel, and others, who show in America that we always admired. So, in that sense, you had yesterday a vote in the European Parliament. Some of the right-wing people wanted to get rid of Ursula von der Leyen because of her promotion of that treaty, with South America, but she won, and I think the additional decision of the European Parliament to support the 90 billion financial support for the Ukraine is another illustration, of resistance, international resistance to what we are watching day by day here, being played in front of our eyes.
Well, so is he. He's watching.
Right.
And he's developing strategies. And Ben, I'm sure you noticed this morning that the Washington Post has eliminated 30% of its staff today. And of course, that's Jeff Bezos. And
right.
Maybe you could argue that it was at least in part because Bezos lost hundreds of thousands of subscribers because he squashed the editorial board's putative recommendation of Kamala Harris. But for everything that we see that offers light at the end of the tunnel, where maybe, just maybe, Trump may be losing some of these games, Trump is active, and I think he's effectively he's crippled. He's handicapped the Washington Post, and he'll go after the New York Times, and he'll go after the podcasters, and he'll go after Kimmel. He has gone after Kimmel. He'll do it again. Kimmel has said as much, and so Colbert. This game, the game is not up, is it, Ben?
Oh no, definitely the game is not up. Yes, I mean the process of destroying what we would call American classic institutions in whatever arena they would let that you think of, academic or business or what, is certainly something that he has been working along with a number of people around him, we must keep in mind, who find this to their advantage too. But can I just speak to a couple of things that really struck me? And I'll just say this, and I'm going to go with his old nemesis, Harvard, for a second. So, and the New York Times. The New York Times makes a revelation that says that instead of trying to get $500 million, they're now negotiating to have Harvard pay $200 million to him. Okay? At which point, he immediately says, no, I want $1 billion in response to that article, saying the article was not right, right? So look at it from the point of view of the party on the other side, right? Which is like the Harvard looking at this, right? You know what you're dealing with, right? No, you know what you're dealing with. Since 1639, you think they've never seen something like this before. and what are they going to do? Is it's like not a dime.
Ben, you point out the New York Times and Harvard. let's look at everyone else in the similar position that's collapsed.
Right. Right.
How many universities, how many newspapers and broadcast stations, how many law firms, how many corporations? So I agree with you. Fortunately, we have a few institutions and businesses that have stood up to him. But you have to compare it to all of the 100 times those people in positions of power and authority who have bowed at his feet.
Right. And so now I'm going to say, enter Epstein. This
here we
is
go.
so wonderful, isn't it? Because you have like CBS and Barry Weiss heading it up. And she puts in place a guy named Paul Attia, who turns out to be in the Epstein files, right? And then you have the head of Paul Weiss, yada, 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 and who turns out to be in the Epstein files, right? And you have this kind of interaction thing going on across this class of billionaires, right? That keeps coming out, and and people see, right? And people see. You even have the crown princess of Norway in the Epstein files. I love it to watch all of these people with their, essentially in their underwear. So what I'm trying to say to you is like, yes, there's a lot of people bent over and said yes, but guess what? They are looking awful. They are all looking awful. The people at UVA, what happened? This Spanberger comes in as the new president, the new governor, and she immediately gets rid of everybody on the board, essentially, including $100 million donor. Why? Because they bent the knee. Or you take somebody like the people who leave these law firms. By the way, I'd like to give a shout out to one of my former students, Jeff Pipoli, who is a lead partner for that case with the Haitians for the temporary protective status. He was, that was successfully blocking the effort to have 350,000 Haitians lose their temporary protected status. And you should read that opinion. You should read that opinion, because that opinion basically breaks it all down, deconstructs it, and says what? The opinion says this is not possible. What you're doing is insane, Mr. President, Secretary Noem. You are insane. And I'm stopping you right now for what you're going to try to do to 350,000 people. Think about the people in Minnesota, all those poor people in the cold. Look at what they're doing.
What are they doing?
They're out there, and they said, hell no. They said, hell no, didn't they? And what happened? Oh, magically, Bovino has gone somewhere else for a little while. Oh, Homan's supposed to be the new hero. They're not even buying Homan. They're not buying any of it. They understand. They dealt with this stuff. And they're saying, hell no.
It's going to reveal him, and he will not have the support that he has. But, and I go to something that Gene Rosenfeld has said, like a primate, Trump is best at beating his chest and provoking the semblance of strength. So if he wins, he takes credit. If he loses, he excuses himself or is silent. I win, you lose, sort of thing. And he distances himself from the punishment, from the accountability of those who refuse to play on his terms by outsourcing it to enforcers and denying knowledge of it. ICE, Border Patrol, FBI, National Guard, Special Forces, the armed forces in general, his own senior staff, cabinet secretaries, oligarchs, and other compromised individuals who have clout and attention. And it's their problem, not his problem. I don't know about that. I never heard about that. So what he has are these loyalists who step up and get thrown under the bus regularly, and he can deny responsibility. So, Gene, what part of that really counts? Is that working too? Ben is right to say that some of what Trump is doing isn't working. Some people are calling him out, but he has techniques. He He has tricks, he has games he plays in order to take credit when it's a win on his terms and deny knowledge and responsibility when it's not. What do you think?
A working hypothesis is only as good as how much it can explain. And I'd like to follow through a little bit more on this metaphor. He is playing games, and that's one way to look at him. But the games he's playing have consequences, and they have consequences at different levels. Yes, the oligarchs and the business people and the elites and the other leaders and so forth, they are being abused, and they are losing in many cases, and they are involved in his game playing. But the game playing is a virtual world in a sense. He's creating a virtual battlefield when he does battle with these people. But they're real people, except he looks upon them as pieces on a chessboard made of ivory or wood. And what that does when he gets down into playing games in the real world with voters is very different. This is a different set of pieces. These are people who were in the hearing yesterday, who were talking about their abuse by ICE and how they, some of them almost died. Some of them did die, and their relatives were there speaking on their behalf. And what we see in Minnesota is the big turnaround. We see the real people in the real world who are going to be voting in November, by the way, are the ones that he really has reason to be scared of. He may be living in his virtual world that he's created, and that is delusional, but it's still functional. It impacts real people in the real world, but they're playing a different game. When Alex Petty and Renee Good are coming up against these ICE characters, some of whom fly the same flags as the January 6th protesters did, some of these who are recruited because they come out of the dark web of the internet, some of these people who brag about, well, I only fired 5 shots, but this woman had 7 wounds. What a great shooter I am. Those kinds of things. Then these people who are real and who have agency and choice and who are fighting for their freedom are not going to behave in the same way as the oligarchs and the heads of state and the elites and the universities who don't have nearly as much at stake as these people do in the streets. It's a life and death game. It becomes a Hunger Games between his paramilitary forces or his contractors who are keeping people in the gulag that he is building down in Dilley, Texas, for example. And when they hear that the people in Minnesota on the streets are blowing their whistles and honking their horns and taking the abuse, they're standing up in their prisons as well. And so as long as you have anyone who is willing to call him out and tell the truth and remind him that these voters come November are going to stage a rebellion, then he's really worried. What is scaring him now, and the reason why he's making concessions with Holman and trying to back off and distract from what's happening on the streets, is that reality is broken into his virtual world and his virtual battlefield. And he doesn't have any empathy for these people. He still doesn't regard them as human beings. But they are telling him something. And they're saying, we do have agency and we're mightier than you are. And the question then becomes, can he change the battlefield in the real world so that the vote in November doesn't take place or it's distorted in some way? That's the question that we're all confronting now, because Minneapolis has won the battle, but the war is still to be fought. And that the first major battle is going to be in November. And the question is not what the oligarchs are going to do. The question is, what are the people going to do?
Well, don't forget, he has a virtual army of people who are his sycophants and who have guns. And it will be a battle in which there are two sides. One will be the people you talk about who understand him, and the other will be the people who are loyal to him, including, an enormous number of MAGA people around the country. He is achieving remarkable ends with that. Even in Hawaii, we had Colin Moore on the show, a political scientist, not too long ago, and he said that the number of Republicans here that support Trump is actually increasing. It's something around 37%. And I don't know if every state has the same phenomenon, but query whether he's really losing ground among them. So what we have here is the kind of X and Y axis, where yes, the people who catch this on the news, and the news is under attack, and the people who work for him. And he's been quite successful in getting an enormous number of people to follow his orders, including the military, including orders that are obviously not legal. So your thoughts about all of this, Jeff? What will happen? What is happening? Will we have midterm elections?
85% of Republicans, as of last week, still fully support the president. 85%, despite everything going on in Minneapolis and other places. Okay? Where he is losing support, and of course, like 90% of the Democrats hate him, and where he's losing support and where there's any hope is in the independents who voted for him because of all the mistakes Biden made and now see, as bad as Biden was, Trump is worse, both on the economy, which is still the number one driving issue. There's no question. If he turns that economy around by November, forget about Minneapolis. But fortunately, he's so preoccupied and his ego is so big, he's making the same mistake Biden made. Okay. So I don't disagree that what we see on the streets and we're going to continue to see in across the country, at least in the blue states and in the 15 states that he wants to take over elections. So let me get to your question. The Constitution is clear. He has no ability, none, to change the way elections are run. There is a little bit of a loophole on congressional races, but the Constitution makes it clear that elections are run by the states. By the way, each state could have a different election day. Did you know that? But they all agreed to have it on the same day. So all of this angst about what he's going to do about elections is a lot of politics, because any constitutional scholar who has looked at this knows he can't do anything. That doesn't stop him, of course, from saying, I want these voter rolls. I want, this and that. And he'll probably place the Justice Department and maybe even his ICE people at polling places in November to try in various cities to try to deter people from voting. I think the reaction, as Gene suggests, is not going to help him. I don't think he's intimidating the common person. Although I happened to see a great story on PBS NewsHour the other day, which, by the way, is the single most bright light in all of television, in my humble opinion. How many students are not going to school in Minneapolis? How many people are not leaving their house? So maybe 2,000 people are on the street, but there are thousands in developments and neighborhoods in Minnesota who aren't even going outside to buy groceries. I mean, so there's a lot going on. But having said all that, I'm not concerned. I think he will try a lot of things, and he has a Justice Department that'll do whatever it can. But we still have the courts, even some Trump appointees. Now, the more recent ones, I don't have much confidence in. But the ones that he appointed back in 2017 and even some earlier in this present term have shown on occasion they're willing to stand up. He still does a little bit better in the circuit courts, as Ben knows, but at the district court level, he's getting slammed case after case. And you know what? As much as we don't like the Supreme Court, at least they're consistent, because today they upheld the California redistricting. All right, in a one-sentence order. So, you didn't like what they did in Texas, but at least they did the same thing for California. So my short answer is we'll have elections. He's going to get 40% of the vote. I'm just telling you. The question is, can the Democrats and independents put together a viable candidate and candidates? And I think in November, they're showing the ability to do that in several states. And when you take the history of off-year elections, the one thing that will stop him or try to stop him, there is only one thing, and that's taking over at least one of the two houses of Congress. Without that, it is a battle to the end. But if they can take over one house, and if, by the way, if some miracle occurs and they can take the Senate, Trump will come up against the force that he hasn't faced in a very long time.
Manfred, to understand here, the contention, the differentiation between pathology and game playing, I think we have to look at The Apprentice. The Apprentice TV show was a reality show, is in the early days of reality shows, and it kind of foreshadows how he instinctively pits people against one another, divide and conquer, to reward those he lionizes as brave or beautiful, and to humiliate and defeat those he stigmatizes as losers. And I think if we look back at The Apprentice and see what he did, we learn a lot about it, the way he plays it. He was a producer, instigator, and he was the audience of the modes of self-glorification at the expense of others. And it does remind you of Schadenfreude. It does remind you of trying to get people, as in, those experiments in San Francisco. What was the name of those experiments again, Jean?
The Stanford Prison Experiment by Philip.
Yeah, you can take a perfectly reasonable person with good common sense and decency, and you can undermine that person's state of morality. And I think he did that regularly on The Apprentice. And then, of course, he would do this routine about firing people. And I watched the show once, and I saw him firing somebody, but I could not figure out why. But I did figure out that this somehow gained him popularity in the TV reality show market. So let's go to Schadenfreude. Our people, including the MAGA people who support him, including, in some places, the growing number of MAGA people who support him because he's doing these really mean, cruel, indecent things, just the way he did on that reality show, just the way we saw happen in Europe. Manfred, what is the role of Schadenfreude in his appeal to so many people?
I think you hit there a great point. I think what he did on Apprentice, he has done on the global, not only on the American political scene, but on the global scene as well. And it stunned people, but I don't think he was all that successful in doing that. In a way, it's very interesting. I must agree with Jean and Jay. I find both of their optimism. Jean's is bigger than Jay's, but I agree with their optimism about what is going to happen in November. But there's one thing that I wanted you to remember. When we are looking at Minnesota, the street scenes, the protests, and the opposition that you have there, remember January 6, 2021 in Washington, D.C. There you have the MAGA crowd. And it's interesting when you remember a study that a Harvard political scientist did about the motivation of many of the protesters in D.C. Based on his analysis of the police interviews of these protesters. He said that the main reason for them being there having been there, was the replacement argument. They are motivated by a deep-rooted anti-black, brown, non-white racism. And I think you should not underestimate the support that the ICE people, that ICE people's behavior in Minnesota still gets from a lot of people in the MAGA crowd. They like what they are doing. And I mean, in a way, it's the mentality that the protesters in DC on January 6, 21 showed. They behaved the same way like these protesters, the ICE people. And they, for some strange reason, get a lot of support. Now, I don't think it will be enough to turn the majority in in Trump's way. But I think do not underestimate the ideological racist dimension, in the support of the MAGA crowd for what ICE is doing in Minnesota and other places.
Very important point. So let's go to final comments here. We're almost out of time. Let's start with you, Ben. Let's start with whether you agree with Manfred, and let's hear your thoughts to try to assimilate all these various games and points that have been raised.
Final thoughts would just be that I agree with everybody. Okay, I agree with. I really do. I think that we are different aspects of the same of a similar picture. I think that on Manfred's point, the last 70 odd years of my life, right, has been watching this kind of battle going on, particularly among white Americans, about how they were going to address dealing with black and brown people being around. And I would say probably when I first, early 60s or so, probably 95% of white Americans probably felt like this MAGA group about black and brown people in America. Well, over time, more and more, as we can see with people in Minnesota, are people who see neighbors and see people not in terms of that strict line among both white people and also among black and brown people. And so the battle right now is really one within the soul of white people, if I would say, but also a soul of America, about who you are. I mean, it really is that. And if you are one who likes the Schadenfreude, who likes to see other people being beat up and killed and all that, and you only react when it's a white person killed, that's a that's a comment on its own. I mean, there have been 8 people killed since 2026 started by these folks. There have been 32 who were killed in 2025. It was only with Alex Preddy and Renee Good that a lot of people sort of said, oh my God, I might actually run this risk. And that's the thing I think that is really in people's minds, is that they're not going to be protected necessarily by their whiteness or their richness or whatever they think is going to be their protection. And so I think that is the thing that is the really at the nub of it, is that the pathology of our good friend President Trump is revealing to people that in fact everyone is vulnerable to him.
Gene, can you give us your final thoughts? And I just want to mention that we had a show just yesterday with Chang Wang, and he pointed out from his philosophical point of view that there is no guarantee, and we don't fully understand this yet. I mean, as a country, there is no guarantee of democracy, of freedom. There is no guarantee of civil rights. There is no guarantee of civil society. And it can go away much more quickly than we developed it in the first place. But anyway, your thoughts.
Well, I have been studying resistance movements, historical resistance movements. One is still ongoing, and that is the Navalny movement in Russia. We don't know the upshot of that. And I've been studying those who have been trying to understand why people in a democratic society would become aficionados or fans of the type of behavior that this president is exhibiting, which is basically a fascist paradigm. And the difference is between America and the other movements that we have had a very healthy and very advanced and unique political system that was put in place 250 years ago. And in my field of study, which looks at symbols and ideology, dates matter. This is 250 years we're going to be celebrating of Lexington and Concord. People are in their minds at some point are not only going to be thinking about affordability, they're going to be thinking about the American Revolution. And the men who confronted the monarchy and the armies of the most powerful nation in the world at that time were feeling very much like the people in Minnesota today. Now, my assessment of our resistance movement, which isn't national yet, but is becoming national, is that maybe we have a 50% chance of winning this next election and actually beating back the American Reich of MAGA, which never has claimed the majority of the people. It's never been more than 40%, quite frankly. And fascists don't need a majority because they are great game players and they manipulate the board. However, in this case, we have a tripartite system, three stools, three legs of a stool. I always think of it as the three-legged stool. And a couple of the legs have been cut off right now. The important thing is to get back that second leg in Congress. And people always say that I talk to continually, what can I do? I want to do something, but I feel so powerless. Well, people who believe in freedom can resist. They did, even in the concentration camps, by the way. They resisted. And what they can do is vote. The first thing you can do is vote. Because if we win this vote, we will have two legs of the stool back. The third leg, the Supreme Court, is very sick. And what it's doing is delaying its decisions, critical decisions on the tariff question, for example, because they're in a bind. They don't know what to do. They don't want to return to what we had before, which was a viable republic. But they also don't want to look stupid. So it's very interesting. I would say that it's a throw of the dice right now, but we at least have a chance. And we have to thank the people of Minnesota for remaining united, because that is the important thing. Put away all your petty little differences and unite behind the Second American Revolution.
Well, all that requires sacrifice. And I guess the rule that I think of, Manfred, is you don't get to sacrifice until you realize that what is happening is going to jeopardize everything you love and own, including your life. And if people, for example, in Europe in the Second World War recognized that earlier, they would have resisted. But they didn't think individually that they would have to sacrifice. And I wonder how close we are to that point. Yes, there are millions of people who are protesting and will protest, but do they recognize how serious this is? Do they recognize that if they don't sacrifice, they will have less of an opportunity to correct it later? Your thoughts and your final comments.
As much as I appreciate Jean's history of American civil society, don't forget that though the Declaration of Independence includes the sentence, all men are created equal, the founders did not believe in the equality of all humans. Slavery was part of the founding, and even after it was abolished with the 13th Amendment that led to the assassination of Lincoln in April of 65, you have then really American fascism getting into its best, with the KKK. So we have not only this powerful, symbolic, democratic history, we also have the sickening history that is part of that we should always be reminded of when we are looking at the scene of the MAGA movement in contemporary America. But I'm still optimistic, I'm sorry to say. In that sense, I'm glad about our agreement, Ben, Joe, and Joy, and I think Jay also. I think we have been we are in the process of reaching a turning point. But don't forget the negative history that is very, very powerful, a powerful negative memory of the history of this country.
Okay, your final thoughts, Jeff? I saved you till last because I know you're going to come up with something very profound.
What happened was, at least since the mid 50s, the two major political parties sparred within a very narrow range of the middle of the pendulum. Sometimes it swung a little bit to the left, sometimes it swung a little bit to the right. But there was an ability to reach consensus on major issues facing the country, with some dissent and some minority view. What happened was the Democratic Party decided to move the pendulum as far as it could to the left on social issues and turned off a significant portion of the country by its commitment to things that most people just don't want or believe in, right or wrong, whether it's, gay rights, whether it's transsexual rights, whether it's this or that, and with an ignorance, I think, of the inherent racism, which some of you have talked about, which is this is a country that has been populated by whites, run by whites, and of course, we've had to give some rights to other people, but that was okay when there wasn't a lot of them. And now they're coming over the borders in the millions, and we're losing control of our white country. But the Democrats didn't realize it or didn't want to recognize it. So what happened is the country swung dramatically to the right, to the other direction, which was this is not acceptable. But what's happened thanks to Trump is that people said, wait a minute, this has gone too far. We were happy to push this country back towards the middle of the pendulum or even a little bit to the right of the pendulum. I'm talking about the majority of voters. But you've gone too far. You've gone too far with how you're taking care of immigration. You've gone too far with talking about taking over other countries. You've gone too far, X, Y, and Z. And so now it's swinging back. That's the optimism. I don't think we're going to become this left-leaning country. I think the country is looking to move back. I'm talking about majority of voters. That's why I'm talking about independents. You're not moving the Republicans. You're not moving the Democrats. You're moving the 20% that are in the middle. And in some places, it's as few as 2,000 votes. When you look at what's going to happen in House races because of all the gerrymandering on both sides, House races are going to be decided by a handful of votes. And that handful, I believe, are the people who say, Democrats, you went too far with social issues. Republicans, you have gone way too far in trying to address those issues. We want to move back to somewhere in the middle, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. So that's why I think we are going to prevail, we being the normal person, the person who looks at what this country should at least be to reflect the majority of views. That's why I think the Democrats, because we only have two parties, by the way, that's another issue. But I think the Democrats realize we have got to try to address some of the people's concerns that forced them to Trump, and he's helping us by how extreme he has been. So that's my view.
The point that I would just like to highlight is that the particular vision that Jeff articulated quite clearly there is one of the fantasies that has been built into all Americans, and particularly white Americans, for 400 years. And so when we talk about swinging left and right or in the center, in fact, what it is it's not, it's a fantasy that was effective for keeping sort of control that was consciously put in place. You can even look at Bacon's Rebellion in 16 something, when it was splitting up the indentured servants who were whites with the blacks and creating slavery as a conscious strategy of control, so that people would look at the guy or the woman next to them and say, that's the person who's causing me trouble, not the person who actually owns the plantation, who's messing with both of them. So that is anchored, and I agree it is anchored, and the great replacement theory and all that is anchored. But, you know, the ironies of this are that people are starting, I think, to say to themselves, you know, we really just can't afford billionaires anymore because of the things that they do. And the Epstein stuff is helping that a great deal as people see the complete hypocrisy of the elite class that has played them against others of the kind that Gene has been talking about. We saw in Minnesota, people standing together because people, I think, and I think that that's an important thing. I've sat in meetings where people have talked about the great replacement theory, you know, and, you know, I've loved it because in my entire life, I've never been in a place where there's been more than one or two people of color among a sea of white people.
If they hadn't killed somebody in Minnesota, how many people were on the street before that?
Okay.
When they were doing the exact same thing without killing.
The thing with white people saying, my God, I might be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's operating, and that's what happened. And you know, and that's but you know, there were people also, like even 4 or 5 years ago, George Floyd, who did react, right? You know, or there are people at the, you know, Charlton Heston was at the 1963 March on Washington.
No,
right?
but that's my point about going too far. And the police department, and it all went with people not on the streets until they shot George Floyd. So,
Right.
You know what I'm talking about? Trump going too far is actually going to help us in November. There are a lot of people that like what he said he would do, but now are totally offended by how he's doing it.
I think they realize they've been played.
Yeah.
And it's hard to admit it, but I think that there's a certain amount of people saying, well, wait a minute, my Second Amendment rights, they're talking about taking our guns? Wait a minute, what's up with that? Right?
Right.
You know?
Whether you call it game playing or pathology, Trump is likely to continue to do what he does. Whether he's completely successful or not, you know, that's anybody's guess. It still is anybody's guess. But the thing that goes back to Gene's notion of game playing, I think, is important, because at this point, here we are in February 2026, and we've seen the games. We've identified some of them that parallel the kids' games. We understand that it's game playing, at least to a significant degree. And we have found parallels to all these games. And so by now, we should be able to understand what games he is playing as well as he does. And so hopefully, assuming there's a continuing contention here, the Democrats, in trying to reach or return to a civil society, the Democrats can figure out what strategies to use by looking at his games. Okay, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much to our esteemed guests, Ben Davis, Gene Rosenfeld, Manfred Henningsen, and Jeff Portnoy. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company, in this episode, which we are calling, What is the President's Game? Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha, everyone.